Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our Cybersecurity Month series. Today we are joined by Simon Wilson from Aruba Networks and Matt Hawkins from Switchshop. We will be exploring campus segmentation, zero trust, and SASE. I will just quickly run you through some brief housekeeping rules before we get started. To the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the chat tab. This is public. If you have any issues with sound or want to communicate with your peers on the event, please write in here. Next to it, you'll see the questions tab. This is private. Only moderators and speakers will see what you write in here. We do encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar, and we'll have time at the end for a Q&A session with both Simon and Matt. Now I'll hand you over to Simon.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be with you. Before I get started, let me just share my screen so you can see what we're going to be talking about today. 1 second. There we go. Right. Is that all okay? Can you see me, by the way? Is my video working okay?
All good, Simon.
Magic. Thanks very much. So thank you very much for joining us for this particular session. Kind of exciting for me to be talking to customers and partners again after a long time of being locked down and focusing on inward things in the office. This afternoon I'm going to talk to you about how we employ zero trust really to help deal with the fact that our world has changed, and also the threats against it have changed as well pretty significantly. My name is Simon Wilson. I'm the CTO for Aruba here in the UK and Ireland, and I have a couple of main parts to my role. One is to make sure everybody understands what it is that Aruba is doing and how it makes a difference to your particular business. And also to make sure that, when we're listening to what you have to say about your particular challenges and your use cases, that we feed that back into our product teams to make sure we build the best possible products we can for our particular market. So please, any feedback you have, please feel free to share, as it always makes a difference. So the world, my goodness, hasn't the world changed significantly? Immeasurably almost in a lot of ways in the last 18 to 24 months. Although I have to say, from a technology perspective, what we've really seen is a bit of a turbocharging, a bit of a hitting of the afterburners of some trends that we were already seeing in the past. This idea that we all became a stay-at-home economy overnight is not really true. We've seen a migration towards that for many, many years. In fact, I've been working from home quite a lot, at least for the last 25 years, but not obviously permanently like we have been during the recent lockdowns or so. But we've seen that increase in every area of life, whether it's working from home, learning from home. Obviously, when the schools were shut, the kids were at home. Now, when the universities stayed closed, and the university students had to kind of come home, to us, consuming all the content from the streaming services. The big increases we've seen now. The services like Netflix and the Disney Channel, of course, how much we all rely on YouTube these days to tell us pretty much how to do everything. The way we communicate with everybody, whether it's through the traditional mechanisms like email, but of course, increasing usage of things like social media to find out what everybody's been up to and share pictures of cats, really. But of course, shopping has been a big one, right? We couldn't go out to the shops, so we decided we needed to continue to consume goods. So everything shifted online. Of course, the downside to that, of course, is we've seen some well-known brands in the high street just disappear. And there's obviously a big question as to whether or not the high street will recover, or if it does, will it look the same as it did before? The point is, this is an acceleration of a trend we were already seeing. And from a business perspective, this has led to an increase in the speed of transition and a slightly different focus on their digital transformation. We were already working with companies before COVID was even a thing we'd heard of, to help them improve the efficiency and the flexibility of their office spaces. Could we use data analytics to identify how many people go to the office and when? Could we use it to identify whether the meeting rooms were in use as often as we thought they were, and if they were the right number of people in them? Sometimes there's a tendency for people to book the nicest meeting room rather than the one that's the most appropriate for the size and the type of meeting they're going to hold. So could we use analytics to identify if we're making the best possible use of real estate, and therefore inform the business as to whether or not they maybe need to change the way their office is set up? We also saw a big acceleration in cloud adoption. Organizations either accelerating that journey, because clearly if people aren't in the office, then having the data in the office or in the data center may not be as appropriate. And of course, there are a number of organizations expanding their use of cloud services. I mean, collaboration tools like Zoom just mushroomed, didn't they, over the lockdown period? And we've seen that in a number of different applications grow in a similar exponential way. But of course, what this does is it really changes the way we think about how data flows around our networks, and indeed it changes our thoughts on the threats that we might see. In fact, here's some data that kind of backs that up from the analysts. The one on the left is from Gartner, and the one on the right is from IDC. And what these really both tell us is that the next decade is going to drive a tremendous amount of transformation in the way we need to build our networks to cope with those transitions and changes we saw in the world around us. This stat here on the left, 75% of data being created and processed outside of a traditional data center, or even for that matter the cloud. That means really what's happening is it's being processed at the edge of the network, where the data is created. So if you think about it, an IoT sensor collecting temperature data or collecting CO2 and air quality readings, we need to sometimes act on that locally. We certainly want to filter it so that we don't send back thousands and thousands of readings that say a very similar thing and end up having to pay ingress and egress fees for a cloud platform to store it. We want to process that locally and store what we need in the cloud. So we need to think about, one, how it will be created, and also what that does to the traffic flows around a network and how we need to protect it. The stat on the right-hand side really tells us that the devices that are creating this data are going to be very, very different moving forward. And although it's not really a transition in the type of device, what it really is a huge increase in the new types of devices that we haven't seen used en masse in the past. The majority of those 55 billion devices that you're seeing stated by IDC there will be what we call headless devices, IoT sensors and actuators, things that don't have an individual user behind them. So consequently, the normal rules about how we secure our network for these devices, like you putting in a username and password, really won't apply. We need to find a better way to identify what those devices are going to be, and also decide what they're allowed to do. So what this really says to us is that networks have to change. Now, I'm a great proponent of this, mainly because having been in the networking industry for at least 25 years, I know I don't look it, but I have been in this industry for 25 years, and I can tell you that it really doesn't matter what networking vendor you are looking at or you have installed. The architecture of that network that you're sitting on today is probably very, very similar to the one that would have been proposed maybe 20, 25 years ago. We still build networks with the same different layered infrastructure with kind of an edge, an aggregation, and a core layer. We still think about traffic flows being from edge to core and back out again, even though sometimes we need to think about what we call east-west traffic, i.e. edge-to-edge traffic. Most of the traffic is flowing the same ways. And of course, the security mechanisms that have been used in the past are still very much what we would normally see today, i.e. if it's a wireless network, we're absolutely paranoid about security, making sure that everybody's got an individual log on, or that the guest access is behind some kind of captive portal. But yet, if you go into a lot of offices, they're wired networks, you can find a port on the wall, plug in, and you probably get an IP address. You'll probably get access to something. And ultimately, that means that that service had to be provisioned by somebody at some point for a given purpose, or it was just provisioned in case somebody needed it. Either way, it created a lot of effort for the people to install and maintain that, and also it creates a potential security challenge because there are services open that we really don't need to be open moving forward. So as Aruba, as part of the Hewlett-Packard enterprise, we very much advocate the use of a zero-trust framework, a zero-trust security model. And that essentially says that we will not allow access from anywhere to anything until we've been able to identify who it is that wants to access it, be it a user with a PC or a phone, or indeed an IoT sensor, and also what it should be allowed to do. So users, right, we know what applications you should be using, we know how much data you really should be transmitting up and down with those apps. If it's an IoT sensor, we probably know the profile of what's going to happen with that, and we want to be able to enforce that. And the golden rule here is that the services that that are available really should not depend on where you connect or indeed physically how you connect. We want it to be exactly the same, whether you're coming on wired or wireless or coming through the 5G network or wherever it might be. Ultimately, the rules about what you should be allowed to do really should be most heavily influenced by who you are, what you need to do, and of course, the security posture or stance of the device that you're actually using. We want to make sure that access to any service must be authenticated first, no black holes, no hidden connections, and it must be authorized and encrypted moving forward. And that's really what we're talking about with Zero Trust. We're using Zero Trust as a starting point so that if there's no trust been granted because you've had made an identification as to who or what it is, there's no access anywhere. And that has other benefits as well moving forward, and I'll explain those in a second. Now, the way we implement Zero Trust is a part of our Edge Services Platform, or Aruba ESP. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of all of the particular technologies here. I mean, the team from Switchshop are absolutely great at answering those kind of questions about, what wireless access points can deliver, our wired switching, how we integrate with 5G, and of course, all of the security and really intelligent management platforms that sit on top of that to build the overall Edge Services Platform. What I wanted to spend my time focusing on is why we built it and what benefit it brings to our customers. And what does it allow you to do, not what does it actually do? And for today, obviously, I'm going to focus on the center layer, which is about Zero Trust. And this really is what we're saying here, is we want to apply the principles of Zero Trust to increase protection levels while simplifying operations. We need to increase the protection levels because the data is not where it used to be, and the threats are not the same as they used to be. But at the same time, we do not want to make it overly challenging either to implement or to live with as a user. One of the worst things you can do is to make access security so cumbersome for the users that they try and bypass it, or they don't use it, or worse, they share credentials because it's easier to do that than it is to remember to log in with their own password now and again. So we want to make sure that it's effective security and effective use of Zero Trust in our particular environment. So there are 4 kind of typical phases to this. The first one is really to understand what is the traffic flow, who's creating it, where it's being created, what services they're requiring, so we can identify what that particular device is, so we can make a good determination as to what level of trust we might want to bestow upon it. So, until someone's logged in, ultimately, or connected to the network, ultimately, we don't know much about them. But the moment they start to connect to the infrastructure, we start to learn more and more about that particular user or that device. If we're connecting it to one of our Ethernet networks, then we're going to understand it from it's what we call its MAC address, the Ethernet burned-in address that every device has. And that can help us start to identify what this thing is and what we should potentially allow it to do. But that doesn't go far enough. In fact, the world of IoT is making this even more of a problem, because what we are seeing is that if you can identify the device, and let's use a good kind of hobbyist, what we call single board computer, SBC, the Raspberry Pi. If we understand that it's a Raspberry Pi Model 4 with say 8 gig of RAM on it, that doesn't really tell us an awful lot about what it's going to be used for. And because it's a very flexible piece of hardware, it can be reprogrammed to do different things. Now, yes, we're going to see organizations program them or run software on them to do different functions within the workplace. In a education environment, we're certainly seeing these devices used both to run services within a university or a higher education environment, but equally they're being used by the students to run things in their halls of residence, or even as part of their research projects. The point is, knowing what it is doesn't tell you enough. So we go beyond that, and we use artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we want to learn as much as we can about that device so that we can give it the best possible profile. And then we've got a profile for it. We can download a policy into the infrastructure that says this is what it's allowed to do. Now, of course, the more we learn about it, the more we can tighten that policy up and tighten that profile up. And of course, the tighter the profile, the more easier it is for us to understand whether the device is misbehaving. I mentioned that devices can be reprogrammed to do different things. We've certainly seen, and it's been in the news a few times, that devices have been compromised on a network, and they've been repurposed as a bridgehead for a cyber attack. So in other words, if we detect that a device is starting to behave slightly differently to the way it should do and the way the policy would allow it to do, we need to take very, very swift action. I mean, firstly, we need to revoke a level of trust that we've given it, maybe even to zero. We might actually want to identify what it's trying to do, because that might help us understand if there's any other potential threats within the, that we're facing from along similar lines. We might want to redirect the traffic for some deeper analysis through, some kind of additional security technology, maybe out on the cloud, something like Zscaler. But whatever we want to do with it, we need to be able to do it fast, and we need to be able to make sure that we can stop it infecting other devices. And this is a big deal, right? Because it won't escape to anyone in the world of tech's attention that a number of organizations, some very, very high profile, pipelines in the US and universities around the world and other companies, have been hit with ransomware attacks. So clearly one of the biggest things you need to do if you suspect that one of those might be about to take place, or that you've got a compromised device, is making very sure that it can't compromise any other devices in the organization. And then, of course, once you've done that, if there are any compromised devices, well, then we need to use our friends over at Zerto to help kind of unravel what's gone on and to recover the situation. But for now, it's about identifying the device, therefore applying the right policy so that we know what a device should be allowed to do. Once we've identified what devices are, we need to approve them for a particular use case. And very clear that we do not want to see any invisible network connections, i.e., just because you went to a certain location and plugged into a port on the wall, you're getting access to services. Until we've identified who and what, there should be no paths. Now, in addition to this being a big security benefit, there's actually significant benefits in terms of network provisioning and troubleshooting at a later date. Because what we're doing here, and I'll show you a diagram about this in a sec, is we're simplifying the base configuration of the networks. And because they're simplified, that means obviously it's faster and easier to set up. But more importantly, it means that when it comes to troubleshooting, we're not sifting through lines of configuration or a number of access control lists, the tools that we use to restrict traffic on a network. We're not going to have to sift through those to find out where the problem is, because once a user has been is disconnected from the edge of the network, then any information relating to the profile that they were given or the policy we downloaded really should be gone as well. So it should be a nice base configuration. So we identify the users and things, we authenticate everyone, we apply a policy to everyone, and then we download that into the network infrastructure that says what they're allowed to do. Now, clearly, we want to use the strongest security possible. So if it's an individual user, we want to absolutely look at using multi-factor authentication. And I would certainly urge anyone watching this that if you have access to a service that offers 2FA or multi-factor authentication, that you turn it on, so that you don't get faced with the situation where somebody's found out that you used the same password on one website that you did on another website, and therefore they got in and changed your credentials, and suddenly they're pretending to be you all over the web. Make sure you change your passwords frequently. Make sure that they're nothing that can be easily guessed. But more importantly, if you have the opportunity, turn on multi-factor authentication, because it's a great way to make it more difficult for people to hack your accounts. Now, the tool we're using to manage all of these policies and profiles and to take the feed in from our device insets is something called ClearPass Policy Manager. It's a very strong tool for managing policy and implementing that on the networks. In fact, it's really strong not only for implementing security on an Aruba infrastructure, but also is well favored within the industry. In fact, last year we won a Gartner People Choice Award for ClearPass to protect any other vendor's network. So it's a great security tool that can help you, one, make the network more secure, but two, make it more flexible in terms of what you're going to be using it for. So once you've identified what the device is and what the policy is that we need to download into the infrastructure, we need then to figure out, well, how does it get from A to B? Remember, I said earlier on that we're not where we used to be. We've shifted, from the office to our homes or coffee shops or wherever we might be. But of course, the other end of the communications path has also changed. Remember, I talked about that increase in the use of cloud-based technologies. So consequently, if both ends of that conversation have moved, then we need to find a more intelligent way to create a path between wherever you're starting from and wherever you need to go to get that traffic across the infrastructure. The way we do this is something called dynamic segmentation. So this is the way we implement a SASE infrastructure, a software-defined services edge, and this allows us to create dynamic paths across the infrastructure on demand when we detect a device at the edge. And going back to what I said on the previous slide, one of the key things about creating these paths on demand is that you don't have to go and pre-provision them before they're needed, which means one, simpler and easier base configuration and setup, and two, easier troubleshooting because there's not those paths through there. Very important actually for us is that, again, going back to what I said about shouldn't matter what type of network you're connecting from. It doesn't matter whether it's a wireless connection or a wired connection. We still want to create that dynamic path across the infrastructure in a secure fashion. A bit like we might create a VPN across the internet. We're using very similar technologies to improve the security of campus networks, and indeed also to speed up and simplify the deployment of these networks moving forward. So we've identified who the user is. We've got a policy for saying what they're allowed to do. We've deployed a dynamic path across the infrastructure. Now, do we sit back and wait? No, we constantly monitor and capture information. Because what we want to do here is we want to do some real-time adaptation. Now, we can obviously do this based on what we know about the device, but as Aruba, we're experts in what we do. We want to stick to our knitting. Which means that rather than try and be an expert in every area of networking technology and area of networking security, we partner with the very best in the industry. And we focus on making sure that our open APIs work seamlessly with lots of different security vendors. In fact, I think we're partnered with over 160 now in the areas of firewalling, mobile device management, endpoint protection, service desk applications, notification systems, so things like Twilio and texting and those kind of technologies. In other words, whatever we can integrate to make it more secure, to be able to react faster, to get more analytics and intelligence about the behavior of users and devices, and then to use that as a feedback loop to make sure we're only using the right level of trust at any particular time is really, really important. And of course, that's why we're using this real-time context sharing and adaptation with these services. So let's say that we're identifying that a user has got some unusual behavior. Well, we can do one of two things. Well, one of three things, actually. We can do nothing, which is not advisable. We can lock them out, which, again, if it's a false positive, someone's going to get very upset very quickly. But what we can also do is, depending on the type of change in behavior that we've seen, we might want to redirect their traffic through a third-party security system. So using those policies to feed it through to another security system. And again, if we can get real-time feedback from that security system, let's say we send it to Zscaler and that comes back and says, actually, this traffic looks malicious. We can then use that to inform the firewall. We can use that to adjust the level of trust we're giving that particular device. In other words, we create a real-time feedback loop. And again, it's our mission to be able to do this with as many different third-party vendors as possible so that customers like yourselves get a real choice in how they implement it. And of course, also the fact that the security systems that you have in place already might be using some of these systems, in which case we want to be able to seamlessly integrate with what you already have rather than kind of prescribe a very limited list of technologies we integrate with. Now, finally, I just wanted to kind of give you a case study of a customer that we've done this for in the past. I suppose, does anyone have any trouble recognizing that building down in the picture there? A 5-sided building in Washington, or just near Washington DC. Actually, I don't think it's actually in Washington. I think it's just across the border there. But either way, it doesn't take a lot to understand that is the Pentagon. The center of U.S. security and also of the military. Aruba is now in place for their wired and wireless networks, and for the wired infrastructure for the non-secure stuff and the more secure stuff. That's what they call SIPRNet and NIPRNet. Kind of cool names, really. I wish you could give our networks cool names like that. The point is, we're now, having gone through a very rigorous process, and you'll appreciate their concerns with just security. they've implemented a number of these capabilities that I've already spoken about and integrated with the other systems that I've also mentioned, to mean that you can turn up, and when you plug a device in, they know what it is and they know what it should be allowed to do, and they will only let it do what it should be able to do from that particular location, including telling some of their applications this user's coming from a specific type of network, so applications can actually tailor the type of information that they'll share back with the user in a more efficient and effective way. So, if you want to hear any more about that, then feel free to ask me some questions. Now, I'd just like to close here before I open up to questions. by kind of sharing the overall vision really for us, HPE as us Aruba as part of the mothership, which is Hewlett Packard Enterprise. We're very happy to be a part of HPE. And it gives us some great insights into where the data actually goes at the end of the day, because HPE, absolute behemoth in terms of the data center networking and servers and storage. So with the majority of that data going to a hybrid cloud, be it your DC on site or into the cloud, we learn an awful lot about implementing with customers who've got multi-cloud strategies. They've got SaaS-based strategies. They're transitioning from their traditional kind of DC-based application to SaaS-based model. We learn a huge amount about that, which influences the way we want to build networks, and of course our influence on R&D, because ultimately for us at Aruba, it starts at the edge. It starts with all the users of the devices and all the things and the phones that we all kind of carry with us every single day, because we want to understand, one, how do we identify who it is that's using that device and what it should be allowed to do? Because the tools we used to use for many, many years are just no longer appropriate. We need new tools to deal with the new way of working, and indeed the new threats that we're seeing from the outside, and also the new threats, frankly, that we're seeing from the inside. Now, that's not to say that these are all malcontent employees bent on destruction of the corporation. Far from it. Most is very innocent. People clicking on a wrong link occasionally, not realizing the repercussions. So, one, being able to identify if something bad has happened more quickly, and to give IT the tools to remediate and fix it more efficiently is absolutely a clear goal for us to be able to do. So we need to make sure that we deliver the right tools to help organizations do this, even when they're more distributed than they've ever been. IT are not on the same site as you are most of the time now, so it needs to be handled even when it's more distributed. It needs to be more automated. We know that IT recruitment is quite challenging right now. There's a lack of skills in the IT world at the moment, particularly in the area of security. So everything we can do to help automate processes and to make it easier and faster for your existing security teams to be able to deliver better services, frankly, is we believe is a win all round. And finally, make sure that we align with our customers' SaaS-based strategies and take advantage of the fact that these things are much more easily implemented and certainly much more agile and faster to develop when they're in the cloud. Really, what this all comes down to is us being able to provide this secure connectivity right from edge to cloud, and as a corporation, that's where we absolutely believe the future lies. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for your time today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the previous sessions. I hope you'll come back, I think it's on Thursday, to talk to another member of the HPE family from Zerto, and how they mitigate if you have unfortunately come a cropper with some ransomware. But with that, I'll say thanks very much for your time. And what I'll do is I will stop sharing so that I can see and answer your questions. So with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. That was a great update around ESP, and certainly a great steer from more of a cybersecurity focus in line with this series of webinars.
Mm-hmm.
We have had a bunch of questions in, so I'm going to read the questions out now. Guys, if you've got any others, please drop them into the questions box, and I'll pick them up as we go. So first question we have is, I like the idea of zero trust, but it sounds complex, and I am concerned about pushback, adding extra hurdles for users to access their data. Can we move to zero trust without these headaches?
Yeah, it's a good question. Nothing is going to come without some effort. But the key thing is to make sure you implement the right tools and the right levels of security. It is possible to do this, where you get much better security and do it in a way such that the users don't feel like this is a big hurdle. We always try to make IT completely transparent, and any security that doesn't require us to do an awful lot more is going to be more successful. So the answer is yes. I wish I could give you a one-liner to tell you how to do it today, but it really depends on where you're coming from, what tools you've got in place, what level of security you need to implement, frankly, as well, because obviously we're going to have people on here who are coming from different businesses, and as a result of that, you might have different requirements. But the answer is it absolutely is possible. I've shown you some of the tools that we have to help you do that, and we'd love to have a conversation one-on-one to kind of figure out a bit more about your particular use case and then advise you appropriately as to what you can do. But the short answer is yes, you absolutely can.
Thanks, Simon. And just to follow on from that, if anybody wants to reach out and have a one-to-one conversation, then we will have contact details attached to all the invites for the session. So please feel free to reach out. There's another good question next. One we hear a lot. I have a lot of equipment that is new and still has value. Can I retrofit Zero Trust without replacing everything?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, most of our customers are in this very situation, is that they don't just go out and buy a whole new network in one hit and then replace it all at once. Ultimately, these things are purchased over time. So the answer is absolutely yes. Now, obviously, there will be some restrictions. We're restricted a little bit by the capabilities of the devices that you want to keep. But anything pretty much that you've purchased within the last 5 to 7 years will probably have the type of security tools. I'm thinking of .1x technology for wired switches, WPA2, WPA3, and captive portal capabilities for wireless. It'll have majority of those things. So the answer is absolutely yes. Generally speaking, where we're implementing the security at the edge, so as long as the edge devices have the capability, then there's no real reason to replace some of your core switching environment to get this to work. But again, let's have a conversation, see what you've got, and then we can advise you appropriately as to what you can continue to make use of.
Thanks, Simon.
No
moving on to the next one. You mentioned IoT a lot. We don't currently have an IoT strategy, so where can I go to get more information?
Right, well, there are loads of places. Our website is a really good place to start. We've got a lot of information about IoT. We've got some really good white papers that talk about designing hyper-aware offices and hyper-aware campuses. When we talk about hyper-aware, what we're really saying is implementing sensor technology to give you more analytical data about what's going on in that environment. So the hyper-aware white paper series is a nice place to start. And of course, we've always got a tremendous number of experts to help us. And indeed, the guys from Switchshop are absolutely great at having these kind of conversations as well. So there's lots of places that you can go and find out more information.
Great. And one last one here. If you've got any more, speak now. When you set up Zero Trust in concept, what happens if someone unplugged a PC and plugged in their own personal device? Will it be prevented to connect?
Do you know what? This is a fantastic question, because this is what Zero Trust was designed to prevent. Okay, this situation where one device has been plugged in, maybe the port was previously configured for that particular device or function, and someone just turned up at the office, and because the security guard let them through into a particular part of the building, that was deemed enough security. Zero Trust is about identifying the device at the time it's plugged in, and then the moment that is unplugged, eliminating all paths available from that particular location. And then when another device gets connected, making sure we make the appropriate decision for that particular device. In other words, no overhang from what might have been plugged in previously. The moment something new arrives, we evaluate it on its merits. We don't rely upon what was plugged into a port previously. And by the way, that also includes where you've got multiple devices connected into a port. So I'm thinking, we've all seen the situation where there's like a small hub on a desk, or maybe there's a port on the back of an IP phone, for instance. When we're looking more than just the one device per port, we're thinking about what all the devices might be connected to that port, making sure they only have access to appropriate level of service based on the policy that's been set up.
Perfect. Right. Well, I think that covers all of our questions. So,
Okay.
Simon, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. For everybody who's attended, thank you for yours. Amy, if you want to just close things off and introduce the next webinar, that'd be great. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Simon. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Please join us on our next webinar in partnership with Zerto, where we'll be looking at ransomware recovery. It's this Thursday, the 21st of October at 3:30. And all our contact details are on the screen there if you have any further questions and want to get in touch.
Yeah,
Thanks
everybody,
again.
please, that's not to be missed, that Zerto one. That's a very, very, very interesting and very useful session.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We'll see you on the next webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.